Okay, and we're live. Hi again. Hello to everybody. I'm sorry we missed seeing each other last week. I unfortunately came down with the flu. That's what you get for taking the flu shot. And thank God it wasn't corona, so it could be worse. Anyways, back in the saddle, and as we go, I want to thank the person who suggested it's my brother actually, suggested that I get a tripod so that I simultaneously am talking to both my Facebook page as well as the Tel Aviv International Synagogue site. So we're in business. So I put up on the website of the daily Torah talks and lunchtime learning for the shul a video about the events of today or the significance of today. Today marks the national observance of the expulsion and persecution and expulsion of the Jews of Arab countries and Iran, because Iran is not an Arab country, and their expulsion from their states of residence prior to the establishment of the state of Israel. Everybody, most of you know, I hope many of you know that yesterday was the 29th of November. Today's the 30th November. However, while everybody was in the streets celebrating throughout the land of Israel that the partition was going to happen and there was going to be a Jewish country and so on and so forth, what happened was that the riots broke out throughout the Arab countries, in the process by which the Middle East basically emptied itself out of its Jews. It started earlier in the early part of the 20th century, and it was varied from country to country. Iraq was particularly egregious. The situation in Morocco was not as bad. The Jews were not expelled. They mostly came to Israel out of proactively. But either way, the fact of the matter is that that Jewish communities that had existed in Arab countries and Muslim countries for centuries and centuries, and in the case of the Jews of Iraq and the Jews of Yemen and the Jews of Persia and the Jews of Egypt for millennia, nevertheless, those communities were destroyed. We have a serious problem in in Jewish self-awareness and Israeli self-identity, that we have an overly Ashkenazi kind of outlook. We talk about the Chalutzim and they all came from Russia and from Poland and from here and from there, from the other way, and that's not correct. The Mizrahi Jews, who make up over 50% of the Jewish population of the state of Israel today, were critical to the establishment of the state. There was an aliyah from Yemen at the same time as my great grandparents came from Russia in the 1880s. They settled in Silwan and in Rosh Hashanah and other places. You only have to look around to see how important critical the contribution of Mizrahi Jews across the boards has been, despite I have to say, a not insignificant amount of discrimination on the part of the Ashkenazi founders. Look at the chief of staff, Kochavi is a Yair Kochavi is Taimani, and it's phenomenal. In any event, and so the what Mizrahi Jews went through in order to come here, and what their lives were like in the last century of their residence in Arab countries and in Iran, was never at the center of the Israeli experience or Israeli education. And I think it was like 6 years ago, a colleague of mine at Bar Ilan, Dr. Shimon Hayano, who at the time was a member of the Knesset, got a bill passed, according to which one has to, the government or the educational ministry has to allocate time to explain or to discuss and to develop appreciation for the Mizrahi experience. So that's the reason why I put up that video. I think it's a very good video. It's not totally exhaustive. It emphasizes the downside of relations between Muslims and Arabs and Jews in the 20th century. But it's not that doesn't mean that it's distorted. The only criticism I've heard of it is the fact that it doesn't highlight the fact that in Morocco, especially Jewish Christian good Jewish Muslim relations were better than elsewhere, and you have to keep that in mind. That's significant because the truth of the matter is, if I may be wrong, but I'm fairly sure that the numbers are correct, that Moroccan Jews actually make up a greater portion of Mizrahi society, Mizrahi Jews in the state of Israel than elsewhere. But I urge you, I really urge you to take the time. It's not today, tomorrow, whenever it is. It's a 45-minute video, 48-minute video. I urge you to watch it. For those of you who have trouble with the Hebrew, there's enough in English that you can get the general idea. There are, I think, there's also for those of you who have trouble with the with the English, then you have also the opportunity of putting in subtitles in English through YouTube. But I really, really urge you. It's very, very, very important that the story of Mizrahi heritage has its proper place and takes a proper equal place in Israeli society, and it's happening. I mean, happily, it's happening. But there's a long way to go. This is especially true in religious circles. Religious circles are overly Ashkenazified. There's not enough, despite Rav Avad Yosef and others, there's not enough appreciation, even of knowledge, of great Sephardic or Mizrahi sages. And even the ones who lived in the Middle Ages have somehow become Ashkenazified. That has to change, in my opinion. We will all come out the greater and the richer and the better for it. And I'm going to add something else. One of the Ashkenazi, because of the experience of the Enlightenment and Europe and the Christians and so on, it's another conversation to have. But the truth of the matter is that the Ashkenazi Jews who came to Israel, or came to the United States for that matter, lived as something of a binary. You were either religious or you weren't religious. So you have these great divides within Israeli society, where there's the Datiyim and there's the Chiloniyim, and they don't really understand each other, and there's no common language, and so on. And therefore, if you leave religion, you chuck it all, and if you join religion, then you go all the way. That dynamic, to a significant degree, is a result of Jewish experience in Europe, especially from the French Revolution, from Emancipation on, from 1789 on. Mizrahi Jews did not live that way, and that was not their experience. Their experience was more traditional. What is traditional? Traditional means that traditional Jewish sensitivities and respect for tradition and respect for Rabbanim and respect for family and for parents and respect for Judaism, even if one was not 100% observant rather. Nevertheless, there was always been deep and abiding reverence for tradition, leading to a situation in which there's a spectrum that goes back and forth of Jewish observance and Jewish involvement, but everybody is enveloped in a Jewish awareness and a Jewish sensitivity and Jewish emotionality, and so on. It is that sort of traditionalism which, in my opinion, is responsible, and I'm not the only one, is responsible for the Jewish Renaissance, which has characterized Israeli life since the mid-90s. And I will say it, I'm going to say this really extremely. I think that if there was one gift that saved the soul of the Jews of the state of Israel, and to a significant degree the country, it's the gift of traditionalism, it's the gift of the Mizrahi Jews. Because Ashkenazi Jews didn't know how to do it. Why do I say the state itself? For a very simple reason. Because the traditional secular Zionism began to sort of weaken in the 70s, after the Six-Day War. After that, other things came in to take its place. In the 90s, what you had was In the 90s, what you had was, excuse me, was the religion of peace and sort of a messianic, millenarian kind of millennialist kind of approach to the world or view of the world. And then that tanked. And when the Intifada broke out in 2000, a lot of people who had put their hopes on that there was going to be peace and everybody's going to love each other and so on and so forth. Instead, we got buses that blew up. That was a rude awakening for a lot of Israelis, and especially since the enemy, the other side, came at us in the name of religion. Whether it's Hamas, whether it was Jihad Islami, and the truth of the matter is that even the PLO is couched in Muslim religious rhetoric and Muslim religious concepts. For not a few people, that led to a sort of reevaluation of, wait a minute, they're coming at us with what do we have? So happily, people came back and sort of became increasingly Jewish because they realized that we have the sources of our resilience are in fact in our own Judaism, and the people who preserved that more than anybody else, I think, was the Mizrahi Jews, because at that point it wasn't a matter of, you didn't have to be 100% Orthodox to be able to be part of this. Now, I'm not saying that one shouldn't keep all the mitzvot. Certainly, you know very well that I do, but that's not the point. The point is that it no longer becomes a binary; it becomes an all-encompassing spectrum, which is far healthier from a communal point of view. Anyways, so that's as far as my paying of praise to the Mizrahi community. I urge you, please, to watch the video. I think it's really, really worthwhile. If it's too long for you, then you can just Google either in Hebrew or in English the day of the expulsion of the Jews from Arab countries, Yom L'Tziyun Gerush Yehudei Artzot Arav v'Iran, and there's all kinds of little smaller and shorter videos. But it's important as part of our Jewish literacy, as part of our Israeli literacy, to actually be aware of what other Jews went through. It doesn't begin or end with the Ashkenazim, and it's about time that we put that away. We're all here. Kulanu Yehudim. Okay, so that is that's that as far as this is concerned. Let's go back to the Mishnah. We were in the middle of the Mishnah that was formulated by Shmaya, who was a first century BCE sage. According to rabbinic tradition, he and his partner of Talion either were themselves converts, or actually were the children of converts, but they made it to the top of Jewish society and headed up the world of Torah Shebal Peh. They may possibly have been the president and the associate president of the Sanhedrin. Again, a matter of debate. He said three things. Shmaya said, "Ehav et hamalacha," love work. Usna et rabbanut, hate mastery, hate sovereignty, hate the rabbinate, whatever that means. Ve'al tidvada l'rashut, and don't get too close to the government. So we had started off discussing the first part of that statement. I want to continue and can't finish it because there's a lot to say. But we will continue talking about that first part today, and we'll get to Snat the Rabbanut tomorrow. And next week, and maybe next week, I'll go into my rant about the Israeli chief rabbinate. Okay, we talked about choosing a trade, the importance of having a trade, the fact that there's a halacha that a parent has to teach the child a trade. Making a living is a very important thing. Being making constructive contribution to society is a critical part of Jewish education and of Jewish self-image. Which raises, and we talked about choosing choosing a profession that you like. We talked about the fact that the option, the alternative is not having a profession is a very, very bad thing. It can lead to going into what's the word? To organized crime, or who else knows what else. It's inevitable, however, that we raise the question of, okay, is making a living, is it a positive good or a necessary evil? So the traditional Christian position has always been, I think I mentioned this, has been conflicted. Um, on the other hand, in general, again, in general, Jewish tradition never saw work as a curse. It's a question of priorities. Um, in other words, work, making a living per se is not a bad thing. However, there are things that are more important. And what's more important than that? And that is Torah study and prayer. So the question is, how do you juggle? How do you actually balance those two? So I mentioned in passing last week, the last time, that there was a difference of opinion between Maimonides and, I'm sorry, between Rabbeinu Tam, the grandson of Rashi, and on the one hand, and his nephew, Rabbi Yitzchak of Dampierre, as to precisely this point. Rabbeinu Tam was of the opinion that under all circumstances, people should go get a job. It's important. You make a contribution to society. You shouldn't become a parasite. He was even willing to interpret a Mishnah later on in the second chapter of Pirkei Avot to the extent that you might even have thought that first laying the constructive foundations of society on business and being self-sustaining economically before you get to Talmud Torah, before you get to Torah studies. So he says, no, that's not possible. You'll never get there. So as a result, you have to do them both at the same time. Now, his nephew, Rabbi Yitzchak of Dampierre, was not so happy with that. He was really actually rather distressed. And he says, no, how can you say that? If a person is able to learn full time and doesn't have to make a living, so why not, let him do it? What's wrong with that? What's striking is Rabbeinu Tam, because Rabbeinu Tam himself was a wealthy businessman, and he could have actually taken off and not worked, but he insisted that it was important. It's a part of one's Jewish value system, and this goes way back. The whole idea that labor and having and loving your job and loving making a living and having the dignity of labor is a value which goes back all the way back to the Bible. Certainly in the Talmud, it finds very interesting expressions. So, for example, in the 2nd century CE, in other words, after the period of Bar Kokhba, there was a group of people who called themselves the Kahala Kadisha Yerushalayim, the sacred community of Jerusalem. They were largely students of Rabbi Meir. And one of the things that is recorded of them, actually in Midrash Kohelet Rabbah, that they a priori, now these are people who are especially pious, that's the piece that's important. They were particularly pious, and they were made a point of dividing their time or their days into 3 parts. The first part was they worked. They worked a half a day, whatever it was, a third of the day, a third of the sun time, of the daylight. The second part of the day, they would learn Torah, or they would pray, or a third of the day they would pray, and a third of the day they would learn. In other words, every single aspect of a person's sustenance had to be taken care of. Your physical sustenance, which is work, your part of saying to God what you have to say to him, which is prayer, and then what God has to say to you, which is study. And you weren't allowed, according to them, to let one impinge on the other. So already, in other words, there already have Talmudic roots to this idea that was portrayed by Rabbeinu Tam, that making a living is a very, very important thing. Now, Maimonides does not mention this group of, this group of the Kahala Kadisha Yerushalayim, which is interesting by itself. Why not? But when he describes how a person should organize his day, he takes it for granted. So, for example, the Rambam in the 1st chapter of Talmud Torah says as follows: Chayav l'shalesh et zman lemidato. He bases this on a Gemara in Kiddushin, and Sanhedrin. A person should divide their time. In 3. Okay, so you should, in other words, that time that you devote for Torah study should be divided into 3. You should learn Tanakh, and you should learn let's call it Mishnah, and you should actually learn how to think also. But but then he gives you an example how that plays itself out. Ketzad, how does this work out in practice? Hayab bal umanut. He has a trade, he has a business. V'hayav sek bimlachto shalosh shaot bayom, and he works at his job for 3 hours a day. and the other 9 hours of the 12, assuming 12 hours of daylight, because don't forget people don't have lights in their house at night. Person like that is going to study. He'll divide his time what he studies according to the Rambam's. But he assumes that there's 3 hours of making a living. Now I say, how? Who can make a living in 3 hours? The truth of the matter is that in the Middle Ages, things went a lot more slowly and a lot more deliberately. And if your store was open for 3-4 hours in the morning, you could especially if you're a what's the word, a money lender, you could make a living. Or you could hire somebody to run the store, or whatever the case might be. But you have to be on the job for 3 hours a day. That's the point. That's a proactive, positive value. Okay. As is well known, Maimonides was dead set against paying rabbis to study. He was against a professional rabbinate. He was against stipends for students. Now he was somewhat unique in this regard because, interestingly, is the interesting part, how things flip. The traditional Spanish Babylonian, in the Babylonian Gaonim, gave stipends to people to sit and study. Okay. In Spain, there was a chief rabbinate that was paid. When Maimonides, I'm going to read you what Maimonides says. When Maimonides inveighs against people who take money for studying Torah, what we would call kolalim, he's actually striking out against. He's actually striking out against what was the norm in his community. In the third chapter of Talmud Torah, he says as follows: Anybody imagines that he's going to go and study Torah, and he's not going to get a job, and he'll take charity. This is a person who has desecrated God's name. Ubizayet Torah, and he humiliates the Torah. V'kavamo or hadat, and he has extinguished the light of our religion. V'garam ra'al atzmo, he causes evil to himself. He imputes evil to himself. And natal chayam olam haba, and he endangers his place in the next world. Lefisha asur lehanot midivrei Torah ba'olam hazeh, because you're not allowed to benefit from the Torah in this world. Amru Chachamim, the rabbi said, Kol haneneh midivrei Torah natal chayam olam haba, as olam, a person who gets benefit from his learning in this world loses his place in the next world. Ve'od sivu v'amru, and they also commanded, Al taseh matara litgadel bam, don't use the Torah as a ways of self-aggrandizement. V'lo kardom lachpor ba. V'od sivu, and then he gets to our Mishnah. He says to our Mishnah, V'od sivu v'amru ehov et hamlacha usnat harabanut v'kol Torah she'eini ma melacha. If you don't make a living, you don't have a profession to go together with your Torah study, sofa b'tela v'goreret avon. In the end, it is going to lead to sin. V'sop adam zeh, the end of this person is he's going to end up robbing and cheating and so on his fellow man. Now now it's interesting. People say, "Oh, that's the Rambam's position," but the Rambam is fighting against what he saw going on in Spain at the time. And on the side of the thing, Rabbi Yosef Karo has a huge polemic against Maimonides, in which he says, no, I mean, if a person's unique, he can do. Why can't he take money for Torah? But the Rambam is absolutely uncontrollable when it comes to that. And in fact, he lived that way. When he came to Egypt, he pooled what little money he had together. He gave it to his brother David, who was a pearl merchant, and who used to go to used to travel to India to trade in stones. He could have lived in Belgium too. I don't know if he said Mazel and Bracha when they had different when they finished deals, but in any case. And the Rambam lived off. The Rambam actually, so he was a silent investor in this family business. I assume he also was consulted on various things, and that gave him the wherewithal to be able to sit and study for the first number of years that he was in Egypt. In 1264, his brother drowned tragically in the Indian Ocean. The Rambam writes that he basically, from what he describes, he went into a deep depression for a year and didn't function. And it was at that point that he went into medicine because he absolutely refused to take money as head of the community or as a rav. So he was paid by the community as a doctor, and as by the wazir in Cairo, where he served at the not the caliphal court but the wazirian court. Um, so the question was, so I'm going to go a little bit over time. I hope you don't mind. The so here the Maimonides is actually tilting at windmills against the norm um, in the Mediterranean littoral, which said you should that if you should get a job, but if you have them if but you know but if you can get prepared, if you can get what's the word, if you can get paid to learn Torah, so that's okay. In Ashkenaz, the opposite was the truth. In Ashkenaz, Rabbeinu Tam's position was the one that won out, and there was no professional rabbinate in Ashkenaz from in the time of Rashi and the Bali Tosfos into the 13th century. Only in the 14th century, after the Black Death, when there were no rabbis and the better rabbis were all wiped out, they began to very, very reluctantly develop this idea that developed the idea that you were not really paying, the same. You hear this chadgadya that they give you, that why can I can pay a rabbi? You're not really paying a rabbi. You're paying him because he can't work, so I'm paying him for him not working. But that's sort of, like I said, it's a chadgadya. And it was only then that you began to get this idea that a rabbi could be paid for Torah, and even then, it wasn't done directly. They were given monopolies. Rabbis served as matchmakers. There was a problem then too. Apparently, there was a problem of delayed what's the word? Singlehood. And what's striking is that the over time the Ashkenazi world and the Sephardi world moved in absolute opposite directions. The idea of the professional rabbinate took hold and rooted among Ashkenazim, to the degree that it is now a given that you pay a rabbi. Whereas the greatest of all the scholars among the Mizrahi Jews were, they by and large were business people. And they didn't take money for their Torah. I just finished reading an example. For example, there's a wonderful book, but I don't have it in front of me, so I don't remember the guy who wrote it. It's a wonderful, wonderful new book that came out about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, about the Ben Ish Chai, about Rabbi Yosef Chaim of Baghdad, who was the preeminent halachic authority in Baghdad at the end of the 19th, early 20th century. And he didn't take money for Torah. And as is well known, the same thing is true in Chaleb. People made a living, and they were chachamim. That was all. In Ashkenaz, it went the other way. That you take money for Torah. The idea of a kollel is an Ashkenazi thing. So it really flips. Why it flips is a really striking question, and I wish I had an answer to it. The biggest irony, however, is the fact that the Ashkenazim justify the idea that you don't have to work based on the citation of none other than the Rambam. Okay, I want to let you sit there and think about that for a minute. None other than the Rambam is the one who's responsible for justifying the kollel culture that people shouldn't work. Why? Upon what is that based? It's based on a passage in the laws of Shemitah and Yovel. The Rambam here is talking about the unique status of the Levites in the world of halacha. Says the Rambam, Lama lo zacha Levi, when it came to dividing up the land of Israel, why was it that Levi of all the tribes did not get a sort of organized, territorially contiguous section piece of land? Ubebizata, and they also didn't get any of the spoils of the conquest under Joshua. Imechav, why is that? Mipnei shehuvdal la'avodat Hashem, He was set aside to worship God, to serve God. L'sharto, that fits the ulahorot daracha v'yesharim v'mishpatav v'tzadikim l'rabim shenemar yarum v'shpatecha b'Yaakov b'Torah Chal Yisrael. So therefore, they were set aside, the Levites, to serve in the Beit HaMikdash, and their cousins, the Kohanim, to run the Beit HaMikdash. So that's why they didn't participate. They had cities, and that's why they don't go to war, because their place is to serve God. However, and that's why Levites get the first tithe, and Kohanim get all kinds of support and stuff like that. I'm going to come back. I'm going to go on to the second part in a second. But what's really striking is, that they don't pay attention to what the implications of this is. Rabbi Soloveitchik Zatzal used to point out. He said, "Look at what is a Kohen? Let's leave the Levium out for a minute. What does a Kohen do all year? What's he do all day? What was his job? The Kohanim were divided into 24 units." And every unit of Kohanim throughout the country would serve 2 weeks of the Beit HaMikdash. So, Rav Soloveitchik said, that doesn't justify all this stuff that they get. That doesn't justify getting so many pieces of meat and so much so much food and meiser and truma. That's ridiculous. Who gets salaries like that? How did they justify their existence, and how did they justify the fact that they were living off the back of the Jewish people? So the Rav said it's very simple. Yoru mishpatech liYaakov mishpatcha liYisrael. They were in charge of education. In other words, you can't, even if you're set aside to serve God in a sacral position, you don't have the right to just take money and not give anything back. If you're going to take, you are absolutely obliged to go into public service and to be in charge of teaching not just your own sector, not just your own community, but the entire Jewish community. In other words, the responsibility for Jewish education falls on the Levium and on the Kohanim as a collective. Since it falls on the Levium and the Kohanim as a collective, then you can pay them. But that's uniquely for the Kohanim and the Levium. And by the way, and we know that to a significant degree, this was actually true. I mean, this worked out. The person who is associated with the first public school system in Jewish history, Yeshua ben Gamla, was Kohen Gadol. And he arranged that there should be teachers, like primary school teachers, elementary school teachers throughout the country in the time of the Second Temple. Now, which is a serious, imputation against the Kollel system, because they don't give back. Anyways, the Rambam then goes on, and so what? So why? But this is what the Levium. So what's got to do with the average guy who's going to sit in Kollel all day? So says the Rambam, V'lo shevet. This is the next halacha. This is chapter 13, halacha 13. V'lo shevet Levi bilvad. Not only Shevet Levi, Elakol ish ve'ish mikol ba'ei olam. Anybody from any place around the world, and even including non-Jews, asher nadva rucho oto vehevino mideo libadel la'asok lifnei Hashem l'sharto lovdo l'deat Hashem. Such a person, if you have a person of unique character, whether he is Jewish or not, that's the striking part. And they really are people of tremendous spirituality, intellectual activity, and they're devoted totally to study and to the knowledge of God. Such a person can be supported in learning. Now notice, the Rambam didn't think he was one of them. And he doesn't restrict it to Jews. So this is a very odd, and he's talking about individuals, but really unique individuals, not somebody who is going to be... not somebody who is not whole groups of individuals. As far as the Rambam was concerned, and included it himself, ehabetam lacha, or ehabetam lacha, two girsas, means everybody's life has got to be a mixture of making a living, constructive contribution to society, economically, whatever, artistically, whatever it is, and you have to find the time as well to divide your 9 hours or wherever it is into Torah study. And that's a built-in value, which is non-negotiable. So there's a lot of, as you can see, there's a lot of stuff around this issue. We could say more, But next week we'll talk about Snata Rabbanut, which we have a lot to say. I actually hinted at, in terms of an established professional rabbinate, that it was never a thing, certainly not among Ashkenazim. But that's not for next time. As usual, take care of yourselves, follow the rules. If the canyon is overpacked, don't go. You can still get deliveries, and we'll see you next time.